Hello, beautifuls. Welcome to Intuitive Conversations with Kristine and Renee Kane. I'm Kristine.
I'm Renee. As best friends and intuitives, we have fantastic conversations in all things spiritual. We have been inspired to share these conversations with you. Hello, Kristine.
Hello, Renee. It's good to be with you.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
I love whenever we have the opportunity to chat.
And I'm so excited. This is our very first podcast.
Yes.
It's something we've had in the works for only about a month.
Yeah, not too long.
So,
began just with a conversation like we normally have on the phone. And all of a sudden we were like, wow.
This is fantastic. This is a conversation we need to share. And so we just like to kind of listen to our highest selves and guidance and whatever comes in from the universe, from the multiverse, from us, and what's most important to be discussed today. What's interesting, maybe not even what's most important, what's most intriguing, what's most interesting, where's the wonder, what's best for us as individuals and best for us to know on a bigger scale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
what pops in?
right. And you were talking about distractions, but you're also talking about the shift in consciousness and how it's ever evolving.
Yeah. The way I see things working is every day is a shift of some sort, of some kind. We're moving energetically, we're moving physically, we're moving emotionally. Something is shifting, and that's what propels us forward.
Yeah. And I've been seeing it with a lot of physical almost anomalies with people, extreme headaches or joint pain or digestive issues, anxiety kind of feels like it's running rampant.
Agreed.
And like it's coming to a peak, and it feels like people are going to burst through a membrane. And again, this may be for some people now, some people a little bit later, some people, we're all going the same direction. We're all evolving in our own space, our own way of doing it.
And we reach that shift point at different times.
Yeah.
And different triggers, I'll say, will get us there. And what will move me isn't necessarily going to move you or anyone else.
True.
So being very conscious of who I am is the best that I can bring to the universe, to the earth, to my family, to my relationships, to my friends, being the best that I can be.
Absolutely. And to not compare ourselves.
Oh, comparison gets us into trouble.
Yep. Seems to be something people get a little bit hung up on is, well, you're doing it this way and you had this experience. It must be, I must be doing something wrong, or mine's not coming in the same way or fast enough.
Or I've been working on this for 2 years and you took 2 days,
Yes.
And so that comparison is, as quickly as we can drop that, release it.
That will really help.
Transform it to something other than comparing myself to, we compare ourselves in, I want to weigh what she does. How did she get there? Or, it's in every aspect. Oh, my house isn't as big. I need to build a bigger house because I want to be bigger than her house or his house. There's so many, when you start looking at comparison and how often we compare. Go to the grocery store. You pick up one orange, you pick up the other orange. That's comparing which orange is best for me. So sometimes it serves us because we do want to know what is the best fit for me, for my body.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm not saying we won't compare anything, but when we compare to other beings, it's a different story.
And that's more what's my best choice, what's my sacred choice, what works best for my system, what's best. So that's even a shift in consciousness, comparison to choice.
Exactly.
Right? And choice is a little bit different than decision.
It is.
It can be, right?
Yeah. It can be the same, but it can be different. Yeah. Absolutely.
So
when you think of all the things in a day that cross our path, that would be a really good, I'm going to say, tool for people to just make note of how often you do compare things. And then just take a look at it and see if there's a pattern for you, if there isn't a pattern for you, if there's something in that that's holding you back from evolving.
Right. And how does it feel when you're comparing? So 2 ways. How does it feel when I'm comparing something? And how does it feel when someone's comparing me or my situation against someone else? So it's it's continual feedback for yourself when you're able to pause and listen to that. And then you can make a choice or a decision
Yes.
how you're moving forward, or maybe the choice is this is working great for me.
Exactly.
So,
It's one of the things we talk about often is everyone gets there in their own way, in their own time, in their own evolutionary path. So when you're tracking yourself on whatever it might be, you'll learn how you do it, how you know, the stages that you have designed for yourself to move through, and you can move through them quickly, or you can take a long time sometimes. And there's not one isn't right and one isn't wrong.
No. So what is shift in consciousness? How do you see that?
As I understand it, it's seeing something with new eyes, I guess is the best way I can say it. The shift in consciousness for me, I'll give an example, was when one of the jobs I've had in the past was working for a school district, and we always had 8 million forms to fill out. And one day I was like, why are we putting everybody in a hole? What color are you? What gender are you? What race are you? What blah, 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 blah. And I just thought, we keep talking about being a diverse society, but when we ask all those questions, we are only making it more diverse instead of recognizing each being as a being. Right. So for me, that was a shift in consciousness. And it was just like a bang, like
comes in like a bullet, right?
You know, after all those years of doing it, such and such, just one day it was like, why are we doing this? So it can be as simple as that, but that's, for me, that was a shift in my consciousness.
That's a fantastic example, because I believe, and again, it may be just a belief, but my observation is, that's probably a better word. My observation is, people think a shift in consciousness, I'm going from a 3D consciousness to a 5D. What does 5D even mean? Are we all going to just walk through this magical door one day or cross the line and we're in 5D? It's like you just continue to evolve how you experience your own life.
Exactly.
And then that leads how the rest of the planet leads their own life, because we are doing it together, but it's really taking a look at everything that we're experiencing. Is this accurate for me anymore?
Very good question. Yeah. That's a very good question.
To me, that's why I see consciousness shifting.
Is this accurate anymore?
And there's consciousness that's not best for humanity, right? Because there's consciousness that can be very unloving or unkind, or, as you said, divisive. But in that moment, for that being, I can't say it's the wrong consciousness, but we will reach a time where that consciousness won't be supported energetically, vibrationally, or frequency, or I was going to say even a little bit, maybe even tolerated.
It's just going to stop its existence because we're not supporting it any longer.
No, and part of that will be, you won't even have the thought, I don't think, the other divisive, anything less than love thought. And when that happens, not sure when that all, again, it's not walking across the magical line, but we're all heading there in the same direction.
It's everyone's process.
Yeah. And someone might have a thought like yours, like, why am I contributing to a system that is not inclusive? We're separate. It's not saying this is a human being that's different than a tree. Now you want to take the human being and divide them every situation way we can. And we're going to look at that and really attach to that. Somebody else might be, my consciousness, a shift in my consciousness might be, I have the right to say no to some things. I have the right to redefine a relationship. I have, so maybe, it's going to be but the individual, they're conscious, and then how do I perceive the outer world too? And we're going to do both of it simultaneously.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I agree totally with that. The whole shift in consciousness is for me, what has been a huge shift is understanding what I mentioned earlier about it begins with me. And I used to always think I had to fix everybody else, or I had to make sure everybody else was having a great day. And then I'd go to bed angry because I didn't get anything. I didn't feel appreciated. Whatever nonsensical thing I want to say. And once I got to the point of understanding, take care of yourself. That's your responsibility. Your responsibility. You get to do it.
Yeah.
And you're just ignoring it. Yeah. So another shift is recognizing that the old adage of, if mommy ain't happy, nobody is.
Right.
Well, if you can just kind of look at that as like, well, it doesn't mean mama or daddy, whoever you are.
Yeah.
Your happiness and happiness for those around you begins with you being happy,
absolutely,
or joyful, or delighted, or fulfilled.
Yeah, it doesn't come from without.
Mm-mm.
And I know for me, similar things to that, but my most helpful awareness was everything's just an experience. Yeah. It's neither right, it's neither wrong. Not that some experiences are really, really joyful, and I'll take a lot more of this, and some are a little more difficult to go through, or a lot more difficult to go through.
Some are.
But they truly are just experiences. And then I get to look at it from, conscious can be even looked at. A 5-year-old may look at something, the same experience, differently than a 12-year-old, than a 25-year-old, than a 7-year-old, and an 80-year-old. So it's not exactly the same thing, but that's pretty accurate way, I think, of looking at things. It's the evolution of, not the mind, because the mind can keep you stuck in a perception.
Yep.
That may not be your best, kind of replace the tape, but the consciousness can shift into, what's the bigger picture? And really like, I'm experiencing what it means to be, I was going to say run over by a car.
Well, that could be
that's one experience, right? But what is the experience to have someone listen to me? What's the experience to have someone not listen to me? Which one do I prefer? If I prefer one over the other, then I get to have intentionally start creating that in my highest and best way. And that may be a learning curve. That may be something we practice.
It may be.
Yeah.
And the experiences can be a learning curve. Because how often does one experience a particular situation and move through it?
Right. And we will.
And then have that same experience in a slightly different way. And it's like, why does this keep happening?
It will keep presenting itself.
Why is it always here? Well, because until we work ourselves all the way through it, it will represent that experience. And that experience is there because it is something that we have desired to go through. And even some of that stuff that isn't pleasant, at some point within us, we want to understand it and understand what is best in it for us and move through it. So until we actually understand ourselves and the experience, it revisits.
It'll show up different ways with different people, different places, different ways. And how do I bring that wisdom into my whole being?
Well, and recognize it, to recognize that, this is the same as, it's the same energy, or it's the same emotion, or it's the same
pot of soup in a different bowl.
That's a great way to say it. Yes.
In a different bowl.
So and then it's like, once you acknowledge that this is a repeat pattern for you, then you get to really work on it.
And it's not blaming you or anybody else that it's continual or
it's part of the process of shifting.
And I think that is a big shift in consciousness. And that's a clue, I think, for people when you find yourself blaming or going into shame or guilt or frustration. We have feelings that are continual, where it seems like that's a bigger part of your day or your week. Not that other things don't come in. Then it's like, then you're probably, possibly, you decide what's right for you. Maybe that's when you're ready to shift into something else because it's just more and more present. I'm recognizing, I'm blaming everybody because my foot hurts. Well, I realized, last year I wasn't really thinking like that way. Or maybe I've been thinking this way for 12 years. Or like, but now I'm aware of it and I'm ready to shift. And the shift in consciousness will be, wow, I really just love being outside. And I'm recognizing that. I want to make sure that's more of my day. Or I really like the way my socks feel.
I'm going to buy more of that brand. Yeah. And that is, it's all in the awareness of what it is you're moving through.
Yeah.
Or what's within you desiring to.
Absolutely be brought up.
To be present, to come out.
Yeah. So one thing I do want to talk about, Renee, regarding consciousness is how we create fantasies. And really for every experience in our life, we have a fantasy created around what we think the experience will be. And that can be the perception of something, what we think it'll be. Then we have an expectation will be, which creates a fantasy. And that is not always our best because it's a little bit different than imagination. It's different than desire. Thinking of my own life, had an expectation of what being married would be.
Yes.
had a perception of what the marriage would be, maybe through looking at other couples, looking at my parents, looking at my in-laws, looking at fictional marriages, factual marriages, whether it's, I didn't look at the King and Queen of England, but, you could look at, or when I got married, it was Prince Charles and Diana were getting married. I had books read, but it really was like, what was my perception it would be? Then I created a fantasy it would be, and then you get disappointed when the fantasy's not there. I'm kind of a romantic. I have things a certain way. I like to make big plans. I like to make things an occasion sometimes. My husband's different. So that was something that I had to adjust to, and I had to look at what was most important. Was the fantasy important, or was the actual marriage important? What I was actually experiencing with my husband. And if I could look back, well, yes, we're not, riding gondolas, and we're not wearing this beautiful outfit flowing, and he's not noticing every day how gorgeous I am and blah, 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 blah. He's not feeding me grapes in bed. But when I looked at, wow, they have a really solid, strong marriage as someone who cares for me and loves me and sees me for who I am. Sometimes at times could see me clearer than I could see myself. When I could allow myself to be in that space, then the fantasy of what wasn't present, that I thought should be present, made my life a lot more joyful. And I do have an experience I could talk about with a client I had many, many years ago. A young mom came in, and actually she wasn't a mom yet. They had just lost a baby, but she was a mom in that sense. But a young mom came in, young wife came in, and she was just devastated because her husband wasn't bringing her flowers to work, and she didn't have the big diamond ring, and he didn't communicate, the way she wanted him to. And actually, it was actually an animal reading I did, and the animal came in, and the animal said, "My mom's in trouble." So that's why we got to talk about this lady. I said, "Honey, don't worry. He loves you deeply. He's just in grief." I said, "Did he have a sibling that died?" And she said, "Yeah, he's actually had a sibling right when he was born. He had a 3-year-old brother who died." I said, "Well, his parents raised him in grief. And when you lost your baby, when the two of you lost baby, he went right into that grief." I said, "Give him about 8 months. He's working really hard with his team. Give him about 8 months, and he's going to turn around. He's going to be the man that you know him to be. And just give up on the rest of the stuff. Do your best to give up and give him some space to grieve." And I forgot about the conversation, went on to my next thing. And about 2 years later, she contacted me and said, "You won't believe what happened. He's exactly who you said he would be. He's the man I knew him to be." He showed up. I got rid of the fantasy, and I was ready to divorce him. But I could see him, who he was, this hurt person who needed me to love him exactly as he was. And he would love me exactly as he could at that moment. And he was grieving the child. And I couldn't understand he had more grief than me, because the expectation would be that the mother has more grief and not the father. But he had double grief to work through. And so we found a way to work through it together.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, I have those experiences in my life. I'm sure you have them in your life or people you work with.
Oh, I do think that whole fantasy concept, if you will, it's that expectation of what something looks like. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to have the best Christmas or the best birthday party or the most wonderful anniversary, whatever it was. My expectations, no matter how good or wonderful or perfect that day may have been, I always had my expectations built for something more. So I always felt like I didn't achieve my end goal. So I was always looking beyond the moment instead of enjoying and living in the moment.
And then you come out on the losing end, right? Because you
think you do,
right? You think this wasn't anything it was supposed to be. And you put in all the effort and all the, again, it's the expectation. Expectation can be very hurtful, right? And that's just a consciousness we stay in, the expectation. Really I would say it's a human condition.
Yes.
To absolutely have an expectation for things. We have an expectation, from the moment we're born, our parents have an expectation of who we will be or who they will be.
And then
we have to keep shifting.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And that's the fantasy end of it, where like you see this end picture.
Yeah.
So you have all these expectations building up to it. So I guess in listening to this conversation a bit, for me, it is about dropping the expectation of anything.
Absolutely.
Whatever, and I shouldn't say
Whatever it
anything,
may
with
be.
everything, anything, and existing for right now, this moment, this experience I'm in, with no previously fantasized. I'm stumbling a little bit here with words because we are creative beings. We get to create our experiences. So it's this fine line of creating something and fantasizing about something.
Absolutely. And how do we, and you need to fantasize, right? That's where imagination comes from. That's where,
Yes.
Being a kid or being an adult and just, I'm going to go look at the clouds and fantasize, or maybe I get into, for me, I just kind of like to sit on my chair and I let things go, and it's more of it's kind of a meditative state, but it's just allowing my imagination to expand my possibilities. And then I understand my desire. And it's getting caught in the fantasy.
Yes.
And sometimes when you're caught in fantasy, you may have it's almost some people, and I see this a lot with client work, is that when one fantasy is not working out the way you want, you create a deeper fantasy. You go even deeper into it, and that causes more unhappiness. That causes more. And really, that happiness is disconnection from yourself, disconnection from your highest self, disconnection from the perceived disconnection, because you're never actually disconnected from yourself. You're never actually disconnected from source.
Right.
And many times the fantasy is a way to correct a past experience.
It can be.
If I don't have a relationship, we are relationship-based people. We are beings who we will always have relationships. And maybe I want to correct something. Maybe I have fantasy about being a parent because the one I had, my parent-child relationship, isn't what I thought I wanted to experience. And actually, from our previous conversation about shifting conversations, we know that all experiences are in some way in our highest and best interest, even when it blatantly seems like there's no way this could possibly be in my highest and best interest. And that's sometimes where fantasy comes from. How can I create something different? And so fantasy can be helpful. What would it be like if? But when the fantasy is attached to an expectation that it can only be this way, just like you were talking about the boxes at the church, that's when we can really find ourselves in difficult situations and creating something in our life that just causes more suffering.
And as you were talking, what popped in for me about the whole fantasy thing is, and between creating something and the fantasy of what it looks like, is so you are going to celebrate your anniversary, say, and you want to create the environment for your husband to bring you home a beautiful bouquet of flowers. And he brings you home a dozen red roses. And you're still disappointed because in your fantasy, you wanted a bouquet of wildflowers.
Absolutely.
So you're creating the situation where you're going to get the flowers. And your fantasy is that it's a bouquet of wildflowers. He brings you a bouquet of a dozen red roses, and you're disappointed because that wasn't what your fantasy was. Instead of seeing that you created a situation where he could bring you flowers. We're attached sometimes too much to the way the fantasy looks.
Exactly how things show up. Which leads me to, I had a conversation with another young person this morning. It seems like I'm always surrounded by young people. Does that have anything to do with my age, or?
No comment.
I think I'm young, and I just think everybody's young.
You're younger than me,
but that's true. Younger than Moses. So, but another conversation where their expectation was how spirit would communicate with them.
Oh, yes.
And she asked me, how do I know? And I said, well, spirit is always in communication with you. Always, always, always. It's just how we perceive. And sometimes you have an expectation that you've been told what's going to show up as a feather, or it's going to show up as a cardinal, or you're going to get chills, or you're going to get, blah, 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 blah. And it's becoming aware of what is my best way of communication. And honestly, we have lots of ways of communicating with ourselves and communicating with spirit and whoever our support teams may be. But it's that fantasy that it has to be a certain way, expectation, the comparison to someone else, and the thinking that we're doing it wrong.
Or that someone else is doing it wrong.
Right, someone else is doing it wrong.
Because didn't you hear me tell you this way in my fantasy?
So I think that ties it all together. The consciousness, the fantasy, the expectation.
Yes.
When we can get ourselves that expectation point, just opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
It does.
And when you're talking to it, made me think about children, how they are in fantasy. And that is their best way of creating.
Yes.
And so it's how do we get back in that not even the mindset, but the vibration frequency of fantasy to create what we desire. Imagination, if you can imagine it, can become a possibility. Can I imagine I'm hearing that song from John Lennon now, and Jim Henson's here. And so I'm seeing a lot of the creative people that are influencers in a creative sense on this planetary system. Ooh, I'm getting chills now. If you can't even imagine, if you can't even see something different, if I can't see my marriage being different, relationship with my children, if I can't see this podcast being something that's valuable to me and you and others, if I can't see my client work, years ago, somebody said, well, you can't do that.
Yes.
You can't do that. You'll never be able to make a living. You won't be able to do it. People won't believe you, blah, 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 blah. If I stayed in that, their perception
of what
my life is, and if I couldn't see, maybe it was a fantasy. I had to, and actually in that moment, fantasy was allowing what already is to be possible in the present state.
Yes.
It's getting rid of those boxes like you talked about. So there again, fantasy is neither good nor bad. No. It's how do you experience fantasy. And I'm choosing, and I'm sure you're choosing, to use fantasy to enlighten and expand our consciousness and bring delight and wonder forward in every moment. So.
Yes, I would totally agree.
Yeah.
And I want to just flip in there a little bit with the piece of understanding that you are the creator. You get to create. And you can allow that creation to come from outside of yourself and just go along with whatever somebody else created. Or you can be your own creator and create what you are willing to participate in, what you desire, what makes you smile, what floats your boat, and you can create it. I'm going to just say we as humanity have so many potentials and opportunities, but we limit ourselves by saying, I can't, or I won't, or no, my neighbor thinks that's wrong, or blah, 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 blah,
right.
Whatever it is.
Or going by past experience.
Or going by something that happened when you were young or whatever.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk about this concept a lot.
A lot, yes.
Because it's so important, and to really understand we are creating, we are co-creators, we create, and it's just not some woo-woo, fairy thing that people talk about. It's actually very accurate.
And the co-creating piece is extremely important to wrap yourself around. We co-create a marriage.
Absolutely. Right.
We co-create a podcast.
A work environment, a family relationship.
There are things that we create for ourselves, but there are many things that probably even more so, and that's maybe a judgment. So I'm just going to say we have the exact potential to co-create with multiple people.
Yeah.
You can co-create with a tree.
Absolutely.
You can co-create with anything and everything. So learning to be aware of this is, again, we're going back to the awareness and understanding that you get to be in charge of your life. And your experience.
Isn't that thrilling and intriguing and perhaps a little intimidating?
It is on some levels, yeah.
And as we've talked earlier, the vibration frequency is shifting, the consciousness is shifting into a more expanded, we would say a better way, if you want to use quotation marks into better. But as we do that, the potentials change. The possibilities for what we can experience changes. And maybe you do find yourself a little bit more in the imagination mindset, or the imagination space. Maybe space is the best word.
Yeah.
If I can imagine it, what would it be like? What would it be? Maybe it's just simple. What would it be like if I didn't have a backache every day? What then could I accomplish? What would it be if I wasn't always freaking mad at somebody all the time, or wasn't frustrated because traffic's congested, or somebody didn't pick up their shoes, or whatever your frustrations may be, or just frustrated because you're not getting what you want to get and you feel like you're stuck. So just the imagination can sometimes help you take a little hop, jump, and a skip into a new experience.
It can, yes. Very, very often it does.
Yeah.
For me, anyway.
We are the creators.
We
what are we consciously aware of?
And
what do I want to be the same in my life, and what do I want to be different?
Well, and I'm looking at that co-creation piece a bit. I'm kind of smiling because before I understood that I was the creator, that I could create on my own or with people, it was always like a co-creation with someone or something. Because I'm going to say, when I first kind of got into this field that we're exploring now, it was like, oh, I'm going to use essential oils because if I use this oil, it raises my vibration to that. Well, that's a co-creation between the oil and me. Or if I'm going to hold this gemstone in my hand because it brings me clarity, protection, whatever I'm choosing, again, that's a co-creation with something else. So when you can, it doesn't, I'm trying to explain that it doesn't have to be your husband, your kids, your whatever.
Yeah, it can be.
It's just look in your life at all the ways. And once you understand how that co-creation works, you begin to understand that, hey, I can create peace within myself. I don't have to hold a crystal. I don't have to use an oil. I don't have to blah, blah, blah. I can if I want to. But once you get to the point of understanding that you don't need all these tools or all these co-creative partners, and you look at it from your own perspective, that you can do it. Wow, that's the most powerful experience. It just
gives you chills.
It does.
And once you realize, and you realize it whenever you realize it, that everything that you're looking for outside yourself, the essential oils, the crystals, and if you love using them, please continue this. If you love the way they smell, if you love having the room, like whatever, if you love having, sparkles in your hair and, let's say a tassel on your ass, do that. Whatever is best for you. But you also realize that they all contain vibration and frequency, which is information, which is wisdom, which is conscious. That's already within you. So all you're doing is you're looking at something outside of yourself saying, oh, I recognize you. I am recognizing I need this recognition within myself and the support. And for now, it may feel okay to get it by holding a crystal in my hand.
Absolutely.
But I also have us with actual, not even only my DNA, but my whole essence, my whole being, because we are multidimensional, we contain everything within this teeny little body that we call ourselves. So it's like finding what's your best way. But absolutely, Renee, nothing needs to come outside. We are creators. We are co-creators. We are magnificent, beautiful beings. We are spirit in action. We are love in action. We're all the.
And I still use all of the tools I've gleaned along the way. And I love to co-create with people. It's like you just said, when you get to the understanding that it's because I get joy from doing this, not because I have to have this thing,
right?
That I couldn't do it without, it's when you realize you can do it without, but it's really fun. It's really fun to do a drum wash on somebody because it's really fun.
Yeah. And I could probably get enough nutrition every day out of having, a bunch of pills.
You could,
or whatever, some kind of powder drink or something. But I like having a variety of food. I like having ice cream with cherry on top. I like dancing in my kitchen. Do I have to have the best life? But no, but I get to choose what I want.
How it looks for me.
I want to do it. Like, no, it doesn't have to be so dry and so boring. So I think we had a really good conversation today.
I do too.
I don't even think I know. I experienced, in quotation marks, I experienced a wonderful conversation with you.
Ditto.
I love how we come together. I love how it's generic. I love how this podcast came to be, that we were just having a conversation on the phone saying, hey, this is really great conversations. Let's record it. Let's put it out there.
It's the way we operate.
It's the way we operate.
And I love it.
It's being in the flow, right?
Yeah, being in the flow, going with the moment.
We will be back next month.
Yes, and thank all of you.
Thank you, really, truly from our heart for being with us.
We are forever grateful to you, our listener. You inspire us to continue listening with our hearts,
to share what we know, and to expand love, peace, and joy within ourselves and others. Until next time, this is Kristine Keeland
and Renee Keene. Be love, give love, and receive love.